The house wakes before I do, but I am always close behind. At 71, sleep is lighter than breath, and the faint creak of pipes can stir me from it. This morning, the air in my room bites colder than it should, as though Leona turned down the thermostat again. I sit up slowly, my knees stiff and aching, and listen for the sound I know will come. 3 sharp knocks rattle the door. Rent's due. Damaris. Pay on time, or you'll regret it. Her voice cuts through the wood like a blade. I let the silence hang for a moment before answering. I remember. My tone is steady. Though inside my chest something twists, she doesn't wait for me to say more. Her heels click down the hallway, brisk and unfeeling. The morning light barely filters through the curtains as I dress in my wool cardigan. In the kitchen, Jonas sits hunched over his papers, glasses perched at the tip of his nose. He doesn't lift his eyes when I take my seat. Leona sets a plate before me, plain toast, no butter, and then leans against the counter. Arms folded. Don't forget utilities, she adds flatly. Jonas shifts his pen, but says nothing. My son. My only boy. The child I carried in my arms while Conrad built this very kitchen. He doesn't defend me, not even with a glance. I sip my tea quietly, as if that might disguise the lump rising in my throat. Breakfast ends without warmth. They scatter Jonas off to his office, Leona to her errands. The house settles into its daytime hush, and only then do I let the mask slip. Back in my room, I kneel before the small cedar chest at the foot of my bed. My hands tremble as I draw out a narrow envelope worn soft at the edges. Inside lies the deed, the proof of a truth I've carried alone for 20 years. Folded with it is a note. Conrad's handwriting faded, but still steady. If they ever forget who built these walls, don't stay silent. I hold the paper to my chest, hearing his voice as if he stood beside me. My breath steadies. Someday soon, I know. The silence will break. And with that certainty, I place the envelope back in the drawer, locking it away until the time comes. I still remember the day Conrad and I first stepped into this house. It was late summer of 2002, the air thick with magnolia blooms drifting in from the yard. He stood in the empty living room, rough carpenter's hands tracing the window frame as though measuring it by instinct. Solid bones, he said, smiling at me in that quiet, certain way of his. We signed the papers that same week, paying every cent outright from decades of his labor. No bank owned us, no mortgage weighed on our backs. It was ours. Conrad worked 45 years with wood and nails, saving carefully, refusing luxuries we couldn't afford. We lived modestly so that one day we could rest easy. I thought those walls would always protect us, and in a way, they still do. Though he has been gone almost 20 years, when he died, I made a decision I've never spoken aloud. I told Jonas, and later, Leona, that we rented this house. I let them believe we lived at the mercy of some faceless landlord. Why? Because I had seen what money did to them. The hunger in their eyes when talk of inheritance surfaced. The careless way they spent whatever Conrad and I managed to give. Greed poisons. And I would not watch them dismantle what we built. The memory of Conrad's funeral remains sharp. People lined the pews, hymns echoing through the church. I was still raw, clutching tissues in my hand when Jonas leaned close. "Mom," he whispered, "what happens to the house now? Is there money set aside?" Not a word of comfort before the question, not even a pause to honor his father's body lying at the front. That was when my choice hardened into certainty, so I locked the deed away. I wore black for a year, watered the roses Conrad had planted, and kept my silence. Every rent payment I pretended to send was only me shifting money between accounts. They thought they were supporting me. and I let them think it. But memories have a way of gathering like dust. Each time I touch that envelope, I hear Conrad's voice reminding me what truth costs. And I know the day is coming when the silence will no longer hold. The kitchen smelled faintly of onions and bleach that evening, the air tight as if the walls themselves anticipated trouble. Leona set a casserole dish on the table with a clatter, then pulled a stack of envelopes from her purse. She spread them like cards in front of me, her eyes sharp. "Costs are rising," she said flatly. "Insurance, utilities, repairs, it never ends. Starting next month, your rent goes up $500. If you can't manage, then you'll need to find another place." Jonas shifted in his chair, staring down at his fork. Not once did his eyes meet mine. He mumbled something about the economy, as if numbers on a page excused cowardice at a table built by his father's hands. My granddaughter Avery sat across from me, fork suspended, her cheeks reddened with the effort not to speak. At 19, she still had a sense of fairness her parents had long discarded. She opened her mouth, then closed it when Leona's glare cut across the table. I kept my face calm, my voice level. "I understand." Nothing more. I lifted a bite of casserole, though it turned to dust in my mouth. The silence that followed was thick, broken only by the scrape of Jonas's chair as he rose early from the table, muttering about work. Later, in the privacy of my room, I pulled Conrad's photograph from the dresser. His smile, forever captured in sepia, steadied me. "They think I'm a guest here," I whispered, brushing my fingers across the glass. "As if these walls didn't rise from your sweat and my sacrifice." The words trembled into the dark, but the fire inside me steadied. I would not plead. I would not bow. Something in me, long dormant, stirred awake. I slid the photo back into place, turned the lock on my drawer, and rested my hand on the envelope inside. The storm was gathering, and I knew I would be ready when it broke. The night after the ultimatum, I lingered in the hallway longer than I should have. The kitchen light glowed under the doorframe, and voices carried in hushed tones. Leona's sharp whisper was the first I caught. "If we present the house as collateral, the bank will approve the loan faster. They can't refuse real estate in this neighborhood." Jonas cleared his throat. "But what about my mother? She lives here. Won't the bank ask questions?" Leona gave a short, scornful laugh. "She's just a tenant. We'll list her as part of the household. The paperwork doesn't care if an old woman rents a room. This is our house now, Jonas. Stop worrying." The words pierced deeper than any ultimatum. Our house. As if Conrad's hands had never touched these walls. As if my own years of sacrifice were invisible. I pressed my palm against the wallpaper, steadying myself. Their voices carried on, speaking of interest rates, repayment schedules, business opportunities. My name was never once spoken. I backed away quietly, the floorboards creaking under my step. In my room, I closed the door and let the mask fall. My heart pounded, not with fear, but with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I unlocked the drawer and pulled out the envelope once more. The paper was fragile, corners soft from decades of being hidden, yet its weight steadied me. I unfolded the deed slowly, running my fingers over Conrad's name, then mine. Beneath it, his note stared up at me, as if he had written it for this very night. "If they ever forget who built these walls, don't stay silent," I whispered into the stillness. "Collateral, not if I sell it first." The thought settled into me like an anchor. For years I had endured paid rent, listened to insults, swallowed humiliation, but tonight, hearing them speak so casually about trading away the roof above my head, I knew my silence had reached its end. I slid the envelope back into the drawer and turned the key with care. The house might have been filled with their voices, but its heart was still mine. And for the first time in a long while, I felt the stirrings of power return to me. The next morning, I left the house earlier than usual. Before Leona could start her chorus of complaints, the air was heavy with spring humidity, and I walked slowly toward town. Conrad's envelope tucked firmly in my handbag. The office was small, wedged between a bakery and a barber shop. Its windows gleamed, the gold lettering on the glass reading Calder Royce Real Estate inside. A tall man with silver at his temples rose from behind his desk. His handshake was steady, his eyes quick but kind. "What can I do for you?" "Ma'am," he asked. I placed the deed on his desk. "I'm considering selling a property." Quietly, he adjusted his glasses, scanning the document. When he looked back up, there was a spark of surprise in his expression. "This is prime land. That house 3 stories. Good lot. Solid construction, ma'am. I'd say we could list it near 850, possibly higher." The number startled me. For years, I had lived as if I barely scraped by, shuffling my own money back and forth to keep up appearances. To hear the true worth spoken aloud was like being reminded of who I once was, a woman with more than scraps. "I don't want my family to know," I said firmly. "Not until the sale is certain." Royce nodded, unbothered. "It can be done. We can set up a trust or LLC as the seller. The buyers never need to know your name until closing. And even then, we can keep your involvement minimal. Discretion is part of the service." For the first time in years, I felt the tension in my chest loosen. Conrad's words echoed through me. "Don't stay silent." I leaned back, folded my hands, and gave a slow nod. "Then let's begin." Royce smiled as he gathered the papers. "You've made a wise decision." Walking out into the sunlight, I held my head higher than I had in years. The game had shifted. And for once, the next move was mine. The lease was signed with little fuss. A modest apartment by the river. Nothing grand. But it had a balcony where I could watch the water move, steady and sure, like time itself. I told no one in the house until the day boxes began to line the hallway. Leona stood with her arms crossed, lips curled in a smirk. "Good luck, old woman. Let's see how far your little pension takes you." Her voice dripped with satisfaction, as though she had won a battle she never understood was already lost. I didn't answer. Words with her were wasted breath. Instead, I folded the last of my clothes into a battered suitcase Conrad once carried on work trips, the leather worn but still strong. A soft knock came at my door. Avery slipped inside, eyes shining with worry. "Grandma, let me help." I wanted to refuse, to protect her from the tension, but she was already lifting one of the smaller boxes. As we worked in silence, she leaned close and whispered, "You deserve better than this. Don't forget that." Her words warmed me more than any farewell Jonas could have given, though he gave none. He lingered at the bottom of the stairs as I carried out the final load, pretending to busy himself with his phone, never once meeting my eyes. When the cab arrived, Avery hugged me tightly, her cheek damp against mine. "I'll visit," she promised. I nodded, knowing she meant it. I slid into the back seat and looked once more at the house 3 stories tall, proud against the sky, built with Conrad's sweat and my sacrifice. For 5 years, I had let myself be treated as a tenant within its walls. As the car pulled away, grief pricked at me, sharp and insistent, yet beneath it, something else stirred lighter, stronger. A strange sense of freedom rose in me like the river's tide. By the time we reached downtown, I was ready to turn the key in a new lock. And as I stepped into that quiet apartment, the silence felt like mine to keep. The weeks that followed passed in quiet determination. Calder Royce moved with the efficiency of a man who had handled dozens of sales like mine. But for me, each step was a revelation. While Jonas and Leona spent their days at work, Calder slipped through the house, unlocking doors, snapping photographs, measuring corners. His voice was steady, professional, but I could hear the admiration in it. "This place will go quickly," he told me more than once. "It's rare to find a structure this solid." The first listing drew interest within hours. By the second week, he was fielding multiple calls a day. Families loved the pond view, the tall magnolia trees, the extra bedrooms. I signed the papers setting the minimum price $840,000. Calder's pen scratched across the page, sealing what felt like a vow they would never hold this house over me again. One evening, not long after, Avery came to my apartment with her backpack slung low, the strain in her young face betraying something heavy. She set her books on the table and sat across from me, fiddling with the zipper. "Grandma," she said finally, "I heard Mom talking to Dad. She thinks once the bank approves their loan, they'll push you out. She said you've had a free ride long enough." She sounded so certain. I reached for her hand, steadying her trembling fingers. My heart didn't sink as I thought it might. Instead, a chill calm washed over me, the kind that comes only when the truth confirms what you already know. "They were planning that before I left." I murmured, "It doesn't surprise me." Avery's eyes filled with tears. "It's not fair. You built that house with Grandpa. How can she?" I squeezed her hand, cutting her off gently. "Don't trouble yourself, sweetheart. They won't have a house to mortgage." For the first time in years, I let a smile creep across my lips. Not warm, not soft, but cold and certain. Conrad's voice seemed to echo through the room. "Don't stay silent." And as Avery sat with me in silence, I knew the day was coming when the truth would strike them harder than any words I could say. The sale closed faster than I imagined possible. Calder called one afternoon with the final numbers, his tone almost triumphant. "Cash offer. No contingencies. They'll sign today." By the next morning, the funds were in my account. Just like that, the house Conrad built and I protected in silence was no longer mine to guard, but neither was it theirs to exploit. 2 days later, the eviction notice was delivered. I could almost hear Leona's shriek travel across town. That evening, my phone lit up with her name flashing again and again, until finally I answered. "This must be a mistake," she shouted, before I could even say hello. Some realtor came to the door with papers saying the house was sold. How could the landlord sell out from under us? "We've paid rent every month." I let the silence stretch just long enough for her voice to falter. Then calmly, I said the words I had carried for 2 decades. There was no landlord. Leona. I was the landlord. All along. For a moment. Nothing. Just the faint sound of her breath, caught in her throat. Then the explosion came. "You monster! You're throwing us out your own family after everything we've done for you." Her rage poured through the phone like acid, but I held it steady against my ear, unmoved. "You threw me out first," I replied, my voice low but clear. "You just didn't know whose door you slammed." I heard a crash in the background, perhaps a chair knocked over before she returned. Her words more venomous. "You'll regret this. Damaris. Everyone will know what you've done. You'll die alone." I almost laughed. Alone is better than being treated like a stranger in the home I built with my husband. Alone is peace, and peace is something you'll have to buy elsewhere now. Her screams blurred into static as I pressed the phone away. I ended the call and set it on the table, my hand steady, my pulse calm. For the first time in years, I felt taller, as though Conrad himself stood behind me. And as night fell outside my window, I knew this was only the beginning of what freedom would look like. The cottage I bought was small, but it breathed peace. A single story with wide doorways and a porch that faced the river. No echoes of slammed doors or clipped voices, only the sound of water moving steady. A lullaby I hadn't known I missed, with part of the money. I chose not to hoard, but to plant. A community garden sprouted from an empty lot nearby. And I found myself teaching younger women how to sand wood, mend benches, and care for soil skills Conrad had once placed in my hands as if they were treasures. Passing them on felt like setting his spirit into the earth. Jonas came once. He stood on my porch, hat in hand, shoulders slumped. Shame hung on him heavier than words. He muttered about work, about how things had gotten complicated, about Leona's anger he could no longer temper. I offered him tea, and we drank it in silence. He left with eyes that couldn't meet mine, and I knew it would be a long time before I saw him again. Leona never came, nor did I expect her to. Forgiveness was not in her nature. Her absence was a relief disguised as certainty. But Avery came often. She filled the rooms with laughter, lugging her books and stories of classes. Her cheeks flushed with youth and hope. She knelt beside me in the garden, dirt under her nails, listening to every lesson as if it mattered. "You're building something new," she told me once, brushing her hair back with a grin. I looked at her and saw Conrad's honesty shining through her eyes. And for the first time in many years, I felt that the future was not lost. The table in my kitchen was smaller now, but it was mine. Around it sat fewer people, but those who came chose to be there. And as the roses by my window began to bloom, I realized the last chapter of this story was still waiting to be written. The morning light slid gently across my windowsill, warming the roses I had coaxed into bloom. Their petals opened slowly, each one a quiet triumph. I clipped a few stems and placed them in a glass jar, then set Conrad's old note beside the copy of the deed I had kept. The paper had yellowed, but his words still held steady. "If they ever forget who built these walls, don't stay silent." I traced the lines with my fingertip and whispered. I didn't stay silent. Conrad, not in the end. The cottage smelled faintly of earth and new paint, signs of the life I was making here. Around me, there was no sense of being tolerated, no tally of bills pressed into my hand, no cold voices reminding me I was a burden. Here, I was simply myself, an old woman who had carried love, loss, and strength far longer than anyone ever gave me credit for. "Love builds houses," I murmured, watching the roses sway in the light. "But respect keeps doors open." Peace spread through me, not the peace of surrender, but of reclamation. I no longer lived as a tenant in my own story. I was the author again. From my porch, I could see the garden beds beginning to sprout, a community of hands and hearts growing something together. Across town, I imagined Leona pacing her rented apartment, angry at a world she could no longer control. That battle was hers to fight, not mine. I turned back to the window, roses catching the sun, and let a small smile bloom. If your daughter-in-law screamed, "Pay rent or get out," would you bow or remind her whose name was on the deed all along?